And we are at the final deep dive.
Number 30.
Number 30, the New York Yankees, a look into a team that I don't think we really need to do a deep dive into because you can just catch any Tuesday afternoon on MLB Network and they'll probably be doing this.
They're talking about them right now.
Right, I'm pretty sure they will be. And I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, at least they're good. Still, because it would be really bad if the Yankees were a sub 500 team and they still talked about them as much as they did. Like, at least they're a very competitive franchise every single season.
I read something this morning. So the Yankees are going on 31 years not having a losing record. They barely did it last year, winning 82, but that kept the record intact. It is not the longest streak in Yankee history, which is 39 years from like 1936, 26, I should say, on.
This incarnation of the Yankees, if we're not counting the New York Highlanders as...
No, the Yankees are the Yankees.
The Yankees have a 57.6% winning percentage.
That's insane.
Right? Nobody even comes remotely close to that.
In fact, this year, the Yankees as a franchise, and they were called the Yankees as of 1913, will win their 10,000th game.
Once they've got their 50th win their season, they all have 10,000 wins. They'll be the first team there, right?
No, I don't think so. Because I think the Phillies go back further.
Some of the teams that never had the change. The Yankees would have very much had 10,000 games if the Highlanders were counted as part of that.
But to your point, they will not have lost 7,500 games when they get to 10,000 wins.
Which is just insane to think about.
It's just a lot of games and all that.
And obviously, they've won more World Series than anybody. They've won 3 times more World Series than anybody but the Cardinals, when you think about it.
Right.
Because the Cardinals have 12?
11.
11. So they
And then the Athletics and the Red Sox and the Giants have 9.
Right, and so the Yankees have 3 times as many of them. The New York Yankees have won 40 pennants. They've made the playoffs 58 times. So think about it. Their winning percentage matches their playoff percentage.
It's disgusting, really.
Basically, every year they make it's just that is why they are the Yankees. That is why they are the evil empire, some people call them. That is why they're the only team in which every fan base in America for baseball knows 2 teams' histories. They know their own team's history, and they know the Yankees' team history.
And as Met fans doing this podcast, we live in the city with the Yankees, and we are not... We're going to be anything but second-class citizens in New York as the Mets. I don't see how... It changed for a little while in the 80s when the Mets won the World Series, but it lasted like 3 years.
Right. and it's still not the same. The Yankees were still the Yankees. It's kind of like and it's kind of worse for the Mets because the Jets and the Giants... all things consider themselves fairly equally between the two of them. The Giants have had more success.
There's no football Giant fan who's going to agree with you on that one.
But what I'm saying is, in terms of the relationship league-wide between how people perceive the teams...
Okay, particularly now.
There's
when they're both terrible.
Right. The Knicks and the Nets don't really count because the Brooklyn Nets are... It's not really a New York team. They were the New Jersey Nets that they decided to put into Brooklyn, and they'll never support.
Well, they're not a Manhattan team.
Right. But they're never going to... The Knicks will always run New York City.
I would agree.
The Rangers and the Islanders, the Rangers have the city. The Islanders simply aren't the city team. But the Yankees and the Mets, no matter what the Mets do, they've been around a long time now. They will always be second fiddle to the Yankees. It doesn't matter what they do. The Yankees would have to have such an unbelievable streak of poor play coupled with the Mets having an unbelievable...
What, you figure like 400 years or 500?
50. like from now until 2070, the Yankees would have to stink and the Mets would have to win 6 or 7 World Series for the Mets to start supplanting the Yankees.
I understand that's nirvana, but I can't even imagine that world.
It doesn't exist. We don't live in that world. We live in a world where the New York Yankees have 27 championships.
And when the Mets were first founded in the 60s, I don't know what year it happened in the mid-60s, but before the season, they would play something they called the Mayor's Trophy game. So as if the mayor of New York would give the trophy to the team. So there would be one game, and the Mets put tremendous importance on in that game, and the Yankees tried to ignore it, basically going, we can only lose here.
Right. The Yankees can only lose. If they win, that was expected. If they lose, how could you lose to the Mets?
And Steinbrenner had owned the Yankees, and the Mayor's Trophy game was still going on, and he wanted to win that game. That was important for him to beat the Mets in the stupid Mayor's Trophy game, which didn't count.
No, nobody cared.
So I wanted to make one note before we started. So when you go into Baseball Reference and you do, you look at the records that we described, and actually the records, including the Highlanders, do make them over 10,000.
Right.
We're just talking about them as Yankees, not yet at 10,000. And who the winningest manager is, and actually there's competition. There's a lot of competition for the winningest manager for a team that has 27 World Championships.
Right, because you have two guys on the two managers who have managed for the New York Yankees that have 7 World Series.
Yeah.
Just think about that.
Who do you pick?
Right. Which one of the 7-time World Series winners is the greatest Yankee manager? Joe McCarthy, not the Senator, or Casey Stengel?
Right. And Casey Stengel. So Joe McCarthy had 8 pennants and 7 World Series. Casey Stengel had 10 AL pennants in 12 years and 7 World Series. In 12 years!
Basically, for 12 years, the Yankees they won. And that's got to be so frustrating.
Unless something really funky happened in a couple of years where they didn't make the World Series.
Where they didn't make the World Series. And it was like somebody got hurt or something.
And that was when Yogi Berra was, that's why he has all that cred as being in the World Series every year, because he was in the World Series every year. So it kind of...
And we're not talking about Joe Torre, who has 4.
Yeah. And not the greatest Yankee manager, though.
No, because unfortunately for him, 4 doesn't mean 7.
Right. So let's do something I like to do. And when we go through the Yankee retired numbers, which, how much time do we have here?
All right, this could go for a while.
So they were the first team to retire a number. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty impressive. I think it was Lou Gehrig's number 4 that was.
It's got to be tough
first.
being a Yankee player when you go through this list, because you realize just how many numbers just straight up aren't available anymore.
Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 is retired twice. I don't know how you do that.
Right.
We'll talk about that in a second. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, and then you skip to 15.
Right.
So
1 through 10 and 15 gone. Right. So right there, you're already pretty limited in numbers you can select.
So Billy Martin's number is number 1. His number is retired. Jeter's 2.
Yep.
We know Ruth is 3 and Gehrig's 4. And they got their numbers because when they started putting numbers on the uniforms, it was based upon where they batted in the lineup.
Oh, okay. So
Ruth was the 3-hitter and Gehrig was the cleanup hitter. A guy named Joe DiMaggio at number 5. Joe Torre got his number retired. Now, obviously, as a manager.
This isn't a ranking of the players. This is just their uniforms.
Right. Mickey Mantle, number 7. I mean, it's a stupid name.
It just keeps going.
Yogi Berra, number 8. Bill Dickey, underrated catcher because he was on the teams in the from 28 to like 40. They won a bunch of World Series. People remember Yogi Berra. They don't remember Bill Dickey, who's a Hall of Famer.
Right, but he's just probably because he's just older, and he won 8. Berra won 10.
So Maris number 9, Rizzuto number 10. You got to have Scooter in there. Right. They retired Munson's number 15. They were the chairman of the board, Whitey Ford, maybe the greatest pitcher for the Yankees ever. Number 16. Jorge Posada's number is retired.
That's a surprising,
I'm not a Yankee fan, so I don't think I would have guessed that.
I didn't think he'd be that beloved.
Paul O'Neill's 21 is retired. Don Mattingly's 23 is retired. Elston Howard, number 32.
That's a name I don't know particularly.
So Elston Howard was the guy that followed Yogi Berra at catcher for the Yankees.
Tough act to follow.
And he won an MVP. Okay.
Followed it pretty well.
And was one of the, he had played, I think he might have played in the Negro Leagues. Oh, no, not really. He was actually
Much
not
after.
in the Major League. He started in the mid-50s, so he didn't play in the Negro Leagues. Casey Stengel's 37, retired by both the Yankees and the Mets. Mariano Rivera, number 42. Guy named Reggie Jackson, number 44. Andy Pettit's number is retired.
Pettit and Paul O'Neill getting it is surprising to me. Both of those guys wouldn't be guys, I think, like, given that they're not quite the same player as a lot of the other guys on this list. Not that they don't mean a lot to the Yankees. It's just like everybody else on this list is like slam dunk Hall of Famers for the most part. And neither one of those guys are even Hall of Famers.
Gator Guidry, Ron Guidry, number 49. We've talked about him a little bit, the pitcher in the 70s and into the early 80s. And Bernie Williams, of course, has to have his number retired if those other guys have their number retired.
I mean, the guy that I'm surprised is Tino didn't get it.
Yeah,
given that all of the other guys from that same period, but I guess he just doesn't have quite the number of seasons with the Yankees that those other guys did.
You think Robinson Cano will have his number retired by the Yankees?
Maybe.
Number 24, was it? Right?
Yeah, it could happen.
Yeah, I mean, he was there where they were good. He was great for them.
But I think the steroid stuff might hurt him in terms of they're not going to like, the Yankees don't like stuff like that. They don't like being attacked.
That or facial hair, apparently.
Right. That's why A-Rod probably won't get his number retired.
So if you go through, their 27 World Championships, they won the first one in 2013. 1993 when they opened Yankee Stadium. So they come to Yankee Stadium,
Win a World Series.
and
Win
they
the
win a
World Series, the first one.
right? So and there are so many because you go into the great Yankees. I'm not going to report them all because there's 27 of them.
Right, but just know that they won a lot of them, and specifically they won a lot of those 27 between 1923 and like 1960, pretty much.
Exactly. So I always think of them in the streaks that they had, right? So
Right.
they had the longest streak, but before they won from 36 to 39, so that's 4 years in a row, and then they run from 49 to 53, and that's 5 years in a row.
Right, so 9 of the 27, a third of them got won in 2 streaks, which is just wild to think about.
And there were very few years where the Yankees, and they didn't really lose in the World Series that much, but they do have a lot more pennants than they do World Series. So it wasn't like they didn't lose ever in the World Series.
No, I mean, they lost that one to the Pirates, we always talk about, the one where they outscored the Pirates by a crazy amount and then still lost.
So they've lost 13 World Series. I kind of like that.
They will, if you can get a Yankee fan by
They're the
telling
losingest World Series team ever. How about that? How about that for the Yankees?
It's a great place to be.
Want to go there. So, and then you talk about their all-time players, right? We talked about the managers.
Right, it's called Go to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and it's still growing. You know,
Right. I mean, and the frustrating thing with the Yankee list is that you have guys you leave off the list that are also unbelievable players. Like you're like, oh yeah, we're not even going to mention guys that would be on other teams' best players list.
And so when we put this letter, we just kind of pick names and think, okay, I'll try to defend that guy.
And we're not gonna go by WAR and list the greatest Yankee players by WAR because again, literally just look at a list of Hall of Famers and you will see it.
So when you get to the pitcher, this
is actually probably one of their weaker positions.
I'd say you're right. Yeah.
Weirdly,
They're not called the Bronx Bombers for nothing.
Well, they're not called the Bronx Bombers because of their pitchers.
Right.
I mean, you look at this, there's not a guy, when Whitey Ford and probably Lefty Gomez are your best 2 pitchers in the history of your team. I mean, they don't have the pitching history like the Dodgers have.
No, and the dominance of but yet the winning of Whitey Ford, the winning of Lefty Grove, and the team's winning World Series, them being the number 1 pitcher, they don't know if they even called it that at the time, but they were.
They were the ace.
The ace of the staff, well said. Those guys had such success that it was hard to pick
and
between them.
And it's not like they haven't had good pitching later when they had their success in the 90s and the 2000s, but those teams were...
Mussine is not an all-time Yankee pitcher.
They were mercenary arms a lot of the time.
CC Sabathia's not an all-time Yankee pitcher.
Though he will be a Hall of Famer.
He'll be a Hall of Famer, but he's not that kind of,
He's not a
spent
guy...
his whole career with the team kind of guy.
He wasn't a Yankee in the same way that Ford and Gomez were. Not that Sabathia wasn't a Yankee.
I agree, and there's no shade on him. In fact, the Yankees are so good that we didn't even include a guy I put in the list only to mention him because he has the most wins in the modern era of any pitcher in baseball history.
Now, he is a New York Highlander pitcher, not a Yankee pitcher.
Right, it was before the Yankees game, but it was
Jack Chesborough.
And baseball fans, nerds like me, know that he won 41.
Let's
41 is a big number.
Baseball nerds know that. Most people do not know
wins.
that he won 41 games in 1904.
But if I mention Red Ruffing and another guy who was a starting pitcher,
baseball
for the Yankees,
name or TV character name.
Again, so if you had to imagine, he would be one of those guys who was pitching on the team when they won World Series, and he was the guy,
right?
And so that, of course, and yeah, maybe they thumped everybody and whatnot, but he was a great pitcher. We just don't talk about him, nor do we talk about. Well, and I put Gator in that. Guidry, who is not a Hall of Famer, and probably just falls shy is where he should be.
Right, unfortunately, he's got 3 Hall of Famers ahead of him, which make it really hard. And then you have catcher, where you have guys like Thurman Munson and Jorge Posada, who would be a lot of teams' best catcher to ever play for them, who don't even get to enter this conversation. They're not even allowed through the doorway because you have Yogi Berra and Bill Dickey, who won 10 World Series and 8 World Series between them, respectively. And Posada has like 4 or 5 of them himself.
Right. And do you think Posada's a Hall of Famer?
I don't want him to be.
It's spoken like a true Met fan. Yeah, I don't think so either. I guess when I look at his career.
Here's my entire reasoning why. Because he's not anywhere as close to as good an offensive player as Mike Piazza was.
Right.
And they were equally bad defenders.
Even if you say Posada was a little, because when you look at the defensive stats,
he is better.
It's kind of well, he wasn't as bad as I thought he was. It's kind of how I look at it.
Right, but it's still not good.
Yeah, it was still not good. He's still not a defensive plus catcher, that's for sure.
And I would need him to at least be like slightly better than league average.
But when you win World Series like he did for the team, and you're the primary catcher all those years, you get consideration.
But at the same time, only so many. I could only give consideration because a team won World Series titles to so many guys on the team.
Like Thurman Munson would be another one of those guys.
Or like because you already have Jeter, who you're giving that credit to. You're already having Rivera, who you're giving that credit to. If I'm going to say a team wins a bunch of World Series in a pad, and that's enough to get a guy in, why aren't we putting the entire Yankee teams from those years into the Hall of Fame then? If any guy played on all those teams, that's an instant ticket to the Hall of Fame? No, I don't think so. Is Scott Brocious a Hall of Famer?
No.
Right, exactly.
Neither is Charlie Hayes, by the way. So far, all Hall of Famers, right? At first base, we have another Hall of Famer. I wonder who that could be.
Again, it's a kind of conversation where Don Mattingly, who took over for Wally Pipp, or was that?
No, well, Gehrig did.
Gehrig took over for Wally Pipp. So you have Don Mattingly, who also overtakes Wally Pipp, and then both of them are completely overshadowed by the monstrous career that is Lou Gehrig's.
And for so many years, even to old guys like me, like you don't want to be Wally Pipped, right? Because basically you had he had a cold or something like that one day, and then Lou Gehrig played in 2,130 games in a row.
Right.
That was the end of Wally
the Iron
Pipp.
Horse.
Like, don't have a cold.
Right.
You're not sick. You're feeling good. I'm going to play.
Granted,
Coach.
the other thing you could say is simply don't have Lou Gehrig be your backup. That's probably a pretty good way to maintain job security as well.
You didn't know.
Yeah.
Lou Gehrig was
he knew. There's no way you weren't watching Lou Gehrig and you knew.
Yeah.
They knew. That's what I got to think.
And is the Iron Horse like one of the best nicknames in all of baseball history?
The Big Train.
That's pretty good.
The Iron Horse. The Sultan of SWAT. And any name that comes closer to a title than a nickname, I feel like has to be up there.
Yeah. Before the podcast, we talked about second base, and I know we mentioned Cano, who the greatest second baseman of all time for the Yankees, and so you thought it doesn't immediately come to mind, and you have to go back and look at Tony Lazzeri from the 1920s,
right? Who's a guy I don't know,
right? Don't know, and his to me his most famous thing was being struck out by Grover Cleveland Alexander in the 1926 World Series. Not Grover Cleveland. Yeah.
Not the president, just a man with the same name.
Right, Alexander.
Okay.
And he struck him out in the 1926 World Series, and so that failure, and the Cardinals won the World Series, is what I remember about Tony Lazzeri, because he was such a great player. Hall of Famer,
But he's just not a Hall of Famer like the other guys we were just mentioning, in Berra, Dickey, and Gehrig. Or even, he's not talked about in that same way. Or when we get to the Yankee outfield, which is the Yankee outfield.
But I would say that you're not going to like this. So if you looked at Cano's statistics as a Yankee in his time there, he belongs.
Oh, in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, certainly based on his time on the Yankees.
Cano. The only reason Cano is not a Hall of Famer is because we want to punish him even more for his performance-enhancing drug stuff. But to me, it's like he did it at a time where there was a league punishment. If the league didn't kick him out of the league for taking the performance-enhancing drugs, it feels like a weird thing to be like, oh no, but you will be kept out of the Hall of Fame.
Well, my thought was that if you're going to look at statistics, driving his candidacy for Hall of Fame, the fact that he got suspended and his career is pretty much over, right? He might fall just a little short on the slam dunk numbers.
See, the thing is I bet if we look at his numbers compared to Lazzeri's,
they'd be better.
They'd be way better.
They'd be better, I think. And Lazzeri had really, really good numbers.
But Cano was an offensive player
and a defensive, 8 Gold Gloves or something like that.
But he was he was an all-time, one of the greatest hitting second basemen to ever play the game.
And just a shout out to Willie Randolph, who I love Willie, and one of the most unfairly treated people in baseball history.
Right, there's got to be a story there why he got fired after that Mets collapse. Now, granted, he did oversee perhaps
back-to-back collapses,
right. Two back-to-back of the worst collapses to ever be in baseball. So, that can't be very good for your managerial track record.
Well, clearly it wasn't for him because he never got another job.
Right. So I gotta
go. Do
I gotta think
where are the bodies buried?
I gotta think it's
Willie.
To me, it's some weird Mark Jackson thing. There's got to be some weird thing about Willie in the clubhouse that they're just not talking about for whatever reason, because baseball doesn't really air dirty laundry like that. But there's got to be something else at play for why he's never gotten another shot.
So at shortstop, and it's funny, I'll only put one in there because there are two shortstops that are both in the Hall of Fame that come to mind right away.
It's Derek Jeter,
right,
and Rizzuto.
Yeah, very good.
But Rizzuto
has the most puzzling Hall of Fame, or one of the most puzzling Hall of Fame resumes.
That, to me, more than any other guy, that feels like a guy that got into the Hall of Fame because the writers really liked him.
And I think you're right, and I think that it's, you're the shortstop on the team, the starting shortstop, and you played. Guy didn't get hurt. So, didn't put up any kind of stuff, but he was the shortstop when the shortstop was like, oh, you got to have a great shortstop to win. And they won a lot of World Series with Scooter Rizzuto at shortstop.
But more than any other guy, when you look at his career stats, I mean, he's got 42 career WAR. He has a career OPS plus of 93.
I thought you said we weren't going to talk about WAR.
Yeah, I had 38 career homers. He has a batting average like none of his.
What's the ops plus? Just go to my
93.
93. So
he had a career OPS of
below
706.
average on base plus slugging. No,
right. And he was not some kind of defensive wizard because it wasn't
well
like
said.
he was winning Gold Gloves all over the place.
So if it's a popularity contest, Rizzuto, you're the winner.
He was the winner. That he was just the guy that got it.
But there weren't a host of other Yankee shortstops when I went back through there.
Besides Jeter.
Besides Jeter, right. And the same thing happened at third base. So that was the only position that I could find where there is no obvious Yankee who's a Hall of Famer.
Right, third base.
Third base?
Well, there is one, and we're just not putting him there.
Yes.
Because A-Rod...
And he's not a Hall of Famer.
A-Rod would be...
I agree.
...the Yankee third baseman who's in the Hall of Fame.
As a third baseman. Would he go into the Hall of Fame as a third baseman or a shortstop, would you think?
He played 12 seasons in New York at third base.
Yeah. Remember when he came in and Jeter's at short, I guess I'll play third.
Right. And I think he played more seasons in his career at third than at short. I think A-Rod would probably want to go in as a shortstop because it's an ego thing.
And basically, when he played third base for the Yankees, he was the better shortstop.
Yeah, he knew, and everyone knew.
They weren't going to move Derek Jeter to third base.
They weren't going to move Derek Jeter, but everybody knew he was the better shortstop because he was a better third. The thing that was impressive about A-Rod is he moved over to third, and he was like a Gold Glove third baseman then.
Yes, but he's not the guy I would pick as my all-time Yankee third baseman, and that's it's sentimentality.
Right.
100%.
This is 100%.
You know how much I love this player.
Because if we compare their numbers, it's not good for Mr. Nettles.
Well, anybody being compared to A-Rod, we're talking about numbers, is not going to be good. So let's be honest about that.
Because that's the thing. A-Rod should be in the Hall of Fame because he's the same caliber of player that the Gehrigs and the Babe Ruths and the DiMaggios and the Mantles were. He was that good and I'll say this, he is a far, far better player than Derek Jeter was.
I think so too.
And I know Yankee, that might be sacrosanct to say to Yankee fans.
And you want to call him A-Royd and all that kind of stuff,
but
that's fine.
He was far greater a player than those guys. He is truly one. Like if you took a top 25
all-timer,
right? Top 25 baseball players of all time. If you're not thinking anything about steroids, A-Rod is on that list, guaranteed.
But on this list, in this podcast, Greg Nettles is my third baseman,
and that's what you get when you. And that's what happens when you get to make this list.
and Nettles, we've talked about him a number of times on the podcast, and some of my favorite moments in watching him play. He's a Hall of Famer, I think, and has because of his having the misfortune of playing third base a long time when Brooks Robinson was playing. Mm-hmm. He didn't get the defensive props that he should have gotten, even though he did have a World Series where he did Brooks Robinson things, and that's how Brooks Robinson sort of solidified his making his plays in the World Series.
A lot of seasons.
Well, Brooks Robinson did it for over 20 years. Right. Nettles did it for 18 years or so, and it had 375 home runs or something like that.
Never got the credit.
Not quite the credit. Maybe not quite the hitter that Brooks Robinson was, but pretty darn close. So shout out to him. And then we get, as you said, to the outfield.
Right. And so the Yankee outfield, I don't think we need to spend any time really talking about these three guys because the Yankee outfield going around is Mickey Mantle, Joe DiMaggio, Babe Ruth. Done, dusted. All right. What do you need to say?
Dave Winfield, sorry.
Yeah.
You're a Hall of Famer. Sorry, Dave.
Bernie Williams.
No. And Bernie Williams, another guy who's like really good career.
Aaron Judge, if he plays for another 10 seasons.
I think so. I don't even think it has to be 10, probably.
He's only played like 6.
I think he's had 17. So, yeah, 6, I guess. So 6 or 7.
He plays another 8 seasons. He'll get there.
And a guy you've never heard of, Roy White, who was a career Yankee. He played 15 years there, and he had the misfortune of being one of the only Yankees to play for lousy Yankee teams the whole time he played there.
So he played
after 65.
Late 60s through the 70s. Until he got out before.
And they got good again when he left some. Maybe it was Roy White. I don't know. No. Anyway, great guy, great player, 121 career ops plus. Just a really good ball player who deserved a shout out here.
Mm-hmm. And then again, you kind of have the same problem when you go to closer because the Yankees don't have their best closer of all time. They have the best closer of all time. This is probably the single easiest slam dunk category for literally any team among anybody because it's probably the only undisputed GOAT of any position.
Sparky Lyle, eat your heart out.
Right.
You're just not quite there.
He is the only, fully unanimous Hall of Famer?
Yep. That's right. Yep.
Mariano Rivera was the best closer to ever play the game of baseball, and he did it throwing one pitch.
And they knew it was coming.
He threw the same. It was a cutter, and he was going to throw it over and over and over again. And somehow, over the course of like 16 seasons, nobody ever figured it out.
A friend of mine's kid was a baseball player. He's a little younger than you are, and he went to Fairfield and he played there. And I guess Mariano Rivera's son was playing at Fairfield University. And so one day Mariano shows up, and so he goes up to my friend David's kid and says, "Oh, his name is Mark." He goes, you're a pitcher, yeah, yes, I'm a closer." He goes, "Oh, just like me." He goes, "Maybe someday you're going to come and take my job." So he had a good sense of humor, Mariano, and I guess he was a good guy to be
Mariano,
around.
how do you throw the cutter? And I'd be like, please teach me.
Just one pitch. I only need to learn
Just
one.
literally, just show me how you throw it. Because if I can throw the same pitch, I've got it made.
We talked about the managers already.
Yes.
Didn't mention Miller Huggins, who won 6 pennants and 3 World Series. He's just an afterthought. How many Met managers have more than 1 World Series? That would be 0.
How many teams? He's got 3 World Series. That's a lot more than a lot of teams on our deep dive list.
So it isn't Joe McCarthy. It's not Casey Stengel. It's not Joe Torre. It's Miller Huggins. Yeah, but he only had 6 pennants and 3 World Series. That's
right.
not good enough.
Which would make him the best manager in, I'd say, 50% of Major League franchises.
They have 13 no-hitters. You remember the most recent one?
Domingo Germán,
just last year.
Corey Kluber threw one a couple years ago.
Yeah, I had forgotten all about that one. And
they've had a couple random guys throw them for over the years. David Wells had that perfect game that nobody expected.
Right. Dave Rigetti threw a no-hitter. He was a closer at one point for the Yankees, and then he threw a no-hitter for them as well.
I think Messina had a perfect game or a no-hitter for them. He might have had both.
I don't know.
He had the one that
did have a no-hitter.
He had the perfect game that got broken up with 2 outs in the 9th inning by Carl Everett.
Very good.
Yeah.
That's Pona. And Allie Reynolds.
And that was against the Red Sox.
You've never heard of Allie Reynolds probably, but he threw 2 no-hitters.
She sounds
he was
nice.
also no. Allie Reynolds was a fine Major League pitcher who is not a Hall of Famer, but he did throw 2 no-hitters.
I could have guessed he wasn't a Hall of Famer when you described him as a fine major leaguer. Nobody that's in the Hall of Fame gets described like that, unfortunately.
And if you just go back through, the litany of
batting team records is just basically, do you want to hear the names Ruth DiMaggio, Mantle, and Gehrig a lot?
That's what you got. I think Jeter's in there for something.
Jeter gets splashed in there. Some pitching, I think, is just a little bit more interesting because it kind of speaks to the fact that they haven't had that same. They haven't had the Yankee ace. Like I feel like that's the one thing the Yankees have always really wanted. Garrett Cole might be the guy that's been closest to being that for them.
I agree.
In terms of his overall dominance, maybe Clemens when he was with them.
Yeah, I think so too.
Those 2 guys, I think, to me, speak as the most, because it wasn't that Pettit wasn't good or Messina wasn't good, but they weren't dominant in the way, like,
I always felt that Pettit was never the best pitcher on his own team.
right?
It was always somebody else.
And if you need any idea that the Yankee fans were thinking of that, remember Joba?
Yeah.
And how
Jabba
Chamberlain, how nuts they went for him. It's because
And then they ruined him.
But I think that was in part because the Yankees have never had that guy in their starting rotation.
That kind of stuff. Well, he ended up being a relief pitcher, right?
Not that they haven't had absolutely amazing pitchers, but they've never had that 10, 12-year guy that's been the undisputed best in the league that was always a Yankee.
I always remember about Jabba Chamberlain being attacked by midges on the mound in Cleveland during the playoffs.
Oh, right. That's a wild story when you look at the Jabba Chamberlain story. It's a lot of weird stuff.
We mentioned obviously the starters that we didn't talk about that were really good Yankee players. Frankie Crissetti, and how do you use Italian shortstops? They went to Rizzuto from Crissetti, and Crissetti was there during the 36-39 run. But we don't even talk about him because he only had a 24 career WAR. So when we talk about WAR,
right, he's even more of a Phil Rizzuto than Phil Rizzuto.
He was just the guy playing shortstop when they were really good, so he gets cred for being that.
It's like okay, but it's also a little bit easier with those teams to specifically point to it's pretty easy to win the World Series playing the Yankee shortstop when you have Ruth and Gehrig on your team.
Just throw the ball.
Right. You're just just field the ball.
We're going to outscore him anyway, probably.
Right, exactly. Teams basically have to issue 2 free base runners, otherwise they're giving up runs every inning.
And it would be incomplete to talk about the Yankees without saying that, with reason, they have reputations for two of the greatest teams of all time. The 27 Yankees,
the 27 Yankees,
and the 61 Yankees.
61. Who was the better team between the two of them?
You'd have to probably ask a Yankee fan, but I think there's more romance about the 27 Yankees because you had Ruth and Gehrig on there.
That was the murderer. That was the Gas House gang.
No, that was the Murderers Row. You're right. Gas House game with the Cardinals. And so this was before DiMaggio showed up, so they didn't have him there. But that Murderers Row team of the late 20s, I think, was probably the 27 Yankees. Just ekes out. Now, 61 had Mickey Mantle and Maris.
I think when we did our best teams episode, like the single season best teams, like that 27 Yankee teams, like actually ranked up there with last year's Braves team.
Yeah, it stands up. So this year, the Yankees, and we'll do a full preview with them when we do our AL East preview. What do you think? If you had to look at their team, you think, are they the best team in the AL East? Do you think they have a championship possibility this year?
I don't think I can't believe them in them for a championship possibility, especially with all the trades they've made for their starting pitch in terms of their staff. Trading away guys like Michael King. Their starting rotation was already suspect last season.
Well, this year they've got Garrett Cole. They got Rodon, who had a rough year last year.
Right.
They've got Nestor Cortez.
Who is not going to be the Nestor Cortez of 2 years ago.
Marcus Stroman. Mm-hmm. And Clark Schmidt, who's the other pitcher. I would say that
the only guy I feel like I can 100% rely on that group is Garrett Cole.
Obviously.
Everybody else I have giant question marks about.
What if Jordan Montgomery were your number 2?
Then I would feel very differently.
Right. Just one thing.
If they go and get Blake Snell, they go and get Montgomery, I feel very differently because I look at that starting rotation, I go, look, Rodon, I have no reason to believe Rodon is going to come back this year.
If he was your number 3, it'd be a lot better than being your number 2.
I necessarily think he won't be good, but I have no reason to think he'll be the Rodon of 2 years ago. He might be. It's hard for him to be as bad as he was last season, but that still doesn't mean, like, even if he regresses back towards the mean, he might still be just like a league average pitcher, which is not very good when you think about what league average actually means. And then guys like Nestor Cortez.
Nasty Nestor.
I'm not a particular. He's a guy that I felt like when he had that unbelievable start to the season 2 years ago, that it felt like
mirrors.
Right. I'm not sure how this is working, and I don't think it's going to.
But if he's your number 5, let's say,
I feel
and Stroman's your 4, let's say.
And Stroman's a guy who was unbelievable for the first half.
As long as he's down at the bottom of your starting 5.
When Stroman gets up towards your number 2, your number 1, that's when you have problems.
There's too much weight. And if
I also worry about Marcus Stroman in the New York Yankee market.
Why?
He's a very outspoken guy.
Well, he did it. He played for the Mets in the city, so he's
but
used
the Mets
to that.
are not the
Grew up on Long Island,
right,
so
the Mets are not the Yankees. And
he doesn't have a beard.
Right, but the Yankee fans do not like when players chirp back.
Yeah.
They do not like when players who are not playing well say things.
It is still a bit of a fall-in-line organization. I think that's true.
So I worry about that how that relationship will go should Stroman not be amazing or just even solid.
And they had a really bad year collectively hitting for the Yankees last year, like much underperformed what they should do.
But I think any lineup that's got a 3-4 punch of Judge and Soto is going to be a good lineup.
And so many guys that were dinged up, nicked up last year aren't this year. I think Rizzo will have a way better year this year. Right, I think LeMahieu's going to have a way better year this year.
LeMahieu's ancient.
He's going to bat leadoff.
Right. It's worrying when like a 38-year-old DJ LeMahieu, you're counting on a big year from him in the leadoff spot. That's not a great. Usually a great sign.
And the big question mark to me, really, outside of that, is I'm not sure why the Yankees think that they can do this without a catcher.
Right,
Jose Trevino, I think, was brought back in.
They've given up on Higashioka.
Higashioka is gone.
Didn't they bring in somebody in the Soto trade?
A catcher, a guy who can put a catcher's mitt on and catch the baseball?
I think that's about it.
It's just so interesting to me.
Did they get Hedges?
They might have Austin Hedges. Yeah, I think.
But
that doesn't change your organization.
No. And certainly, I still look at that team and I go, okay, I need one more guy to have a year. I can count on Soto. I can count on Judge. But I look at the rest of the guys on that team, and I mean, Rizzo and LeMahieu are nice players, but I'd consider them older veterans at this point. I need some other guy on that. If they're going to be a World Series
like Alex Verdugo,
right, one of those guys, somebody else on that team. What's the shortstop that flies?
Volpe. Yeah.
Volpe has to hit like 280.
Yeah, well, that's now the guy hit a lot of home runs last year.
And
Shortstop
stole a ton of bases.
and played good defense for them. So
Right, but
he's quietly done.
He hit like 220.
Yeah.
And the same thing we were struggling with Pete. There's a big difference hitting 220 and 250.
Agreed.
You are when you're hitting 220 and below, you are a black hole in the lineup in a way that you are not when you're hitting 250.
Anyway, we won't give away everything
Right.
in our preview for the Yankees, but I certainly think they have a chance in that division, and
I think any team with Soto and Judge has a chance.
I think you're right. But so this is the end of our deep dives.
We've reached the end.
Yeah.
All the teams. What are we going to replace this with?
And thanks everybody for listening to these because it took us a while to get through all 30. We kind of
I'm glad that we were able to.
Sort of, can we keep the podcast going long enough to get through all 30 deep
We were
dives?
able to.
We were
So
able to.
I'm glad we got here, and we got to come up with a new series to get started on.
Yeah,
I think we got some ideas.
If you give us some ideas too, we'll come up with other stuff. But thanks and appreciate that you're listening.